They had taken his shoes, which he understood, and his glasses, which he did not. Salvador Quiring sat with his hands flat on a metal table in a compartment 3 decks below the HFY flagship's spine, and the thing on the table in front of him was blurred at the edges. Gray box, longer than his forearm, corroded at the corners in a way that meant vacuum rather than water. Somebody had cleaned the face of it recently and badly, leaving streaks in the oxide, and under the streaks he could see the raised letters of a manufacturer's plate that had been stamped in a foundry on a world that no longer existed. He knew what it was from across the room. He had known before they brought him in, because a HFY adept had spent the previous night asking him questions about Chandler pattern sortation. And there was only one reason anyone asked those questions. The door cycled. He did not look up. Warrant Officer Quiring. The voice was low and unhurried and came from a throat that had learned trade standard properly, without the click shortening that most HFY used. You have not asked what happened to your ship. No. Would you like to know? I watched it happen through a port, Quiring said. I don't need it confirmed. Marshal Ittu Rekh came around into his field of vision and stood on the other side of the table. Blurred, he was an impression. Tall, narrow through the shoulders, the gray-green of HFY skin under a plain working coat with no ornament on it. Quiring had been listening to this man's fleet traffic for 12 years. He had never expected to smell him. 28 of your people were taken alive, Rekh said. They are in the aft holds, and they are being fed. Your commander is aboard. I mention this because you will otherwise construct something worse in your head. And I have no time for you to be frightened of the wrong things. Where are my glasses? On my desk. Rekh sat down. He did it carefully, the way a man sits who has been standing for a long time and intends to stand again soon. You will have them when I am satisfied that you cannot see well enough to read a display over my shoulder. Not before. That is not cruelty. It is housekeeping. You could just not stand in front of displays. I could. Rekh laid one hand on the corroded box, not possessively, more the way a surgeon rests a hand on an instrument tray. Tell me what this is. Quiring looked at the streaked oxide. There was a version of the next hour where he said nothing, and a version where he said everything. And he had spent the transit from the wreck of the Kittiwake trying to work out which of the two would kill fewer people, and had arrived at no answer at all. What he had arrived at instead was a small, cold, professional observation. The Marshal had brought the thing into the room. He had not needed to. He could have kept it 2 decks away and asked questions about it in the abstract for a week, which meant the Marshal was in a hurry and did not intend to let Quiring see that he was. It's a mark, Quiring said. Say more. You already know. I know what it is called and what it did. Rekh's inner eyelids moved once, sideways, which in a HFY was the equivalent of a man leaning forward. I do not know how it is fed. That is the whole of my interest in you. Then you'll be disappointed. I'm a listener. I don't build things. Warrant Officer. Rekh's tone did not change in any way that Quiring could detect. In the last 11 years, you have filed 406 intercept assessments concerning HFY fleet traffic. I have read 160 of them. Your handwriting on a signal is as distinct to me as a face. You have a habit of noting the temperature of a transmitter as a fraction rather than a value, which nobody else in your service does. And I have used that habit twice to identify which of your listening posts was awake. He let that stand for a moment. I did not capture a picket at Orem Drift by accident. I have been reading you for a decade, and when I decided I needed a man who had spent his working life inside the calibration of 3 navies, I went and got the one I had been reading. Quiring's mouth had gone dry. "That's flattering," he said. "It is not intended to be. It is intended to save us both the part where you tell me you are unimportant." Rekh stood. "You are the only living person I'm aware of who can do the thing I require. That fact protects you completely, and it will not protect anyone else on this ship at all. Consider it, please, at your leisure. You have until my adept has the mark under power." They put her in the flag chart room, which told Commander Rosalind Ibe two things before anyone said a word to her. The first was that they wanted her to see the plot. Nobody parks a prisoner in a chart room by accident. You park her there because you want her looking at something. The second was that the flag chart room aboard Iron Sequent still ran a wall plot with a physical surface, which meant the HASP had not yet stopped believing that a senior officer should be able to put a hand on a volume of space and feel where his fleet was. She stood in front of the wall with a HASP guard behind her and read the reach. Kestrel Gate sat at the center of it as a pale hexagon, a junction of 4 transit lanes, held by humanity for 60-odd years by the accident of having got there first and the further accident of nobody thinking it worth a war. There were something like 12,000 human beings on the station and the 2 rocks that fed it. The garrison was a picket squadron of 6 hulls, one of which was now scattered across Orem Drift. Converging on the hexagon were 3 formations, drawn in 3 colors. And Ibe looked at them for a long moment and felt her stomach drop away. HASP from the trailing side, which she had known about. That was Rekh, an Iron Sequent, and the 40-odd hulls of the Ordnance Second Order. Barrel Combine from Spinward, not a raid. A full commercial escort array, the kind the Combine only sortied when it intended to be somewhere for a generation. Oyan Sept from below the plane, which should not have been possible because the Sept's tethers did not reach that far, and everyone in the reach knew it. And there they were. 3 fleets, none of them allies. None of them able to tolerate either of the others holding the gate, and all 3 arriving inside the same handful of days. "You understand it," said Rekh from the doorway. Ibe did not turn. "It's a race." "It is worse than a race." He came and stood beside her, hands behind his back. "A race has a winner. This has 3 parties who each know that whoever arrives second must fight, and whoever arrives third must fight both. So each of us has been building for a year to arrive first with enough weight to make arriving second pointless. And now we will all arrive together, because we all had the same idea, and the reach will burn from your gate outward for the next 20 years. That's very sad. You could turn around. I could." He glanced at her. "The Combine would take the gate. In 6 years, my ordnate would be trading through barrel factors at barrel prices, and in 12 there would be a Combine yard at Orem, and my grandchildren would be provincials. I am not being greedy, Commander. I am doing the only arithmetic available to me. So is the Combine, so is the Sept. That is the difficulty with the whole business. There is no villain here for you to be angry at, only 3 fleets that cannot stop. There's you." "Yes," Rekh said. "There is me, and I intend to stop it. And I will need one of your people to help me. And I would prefer it were you, because you outrank him, and it would go faster." Ibe turned around. Up close, he was older than she had expected. There was a dry, papery quality to the skin around his throat, and one of his hands had the tremor that HASP got late in life and hid badly. "Help you take the gate," she said. "Help me empty it of the other 2. He nodded at the wall. "You have a station full of civilians in the middle of a 3-cornered fight. I have a fleet that will be gutted, winning a junction that will be worthless afterward. There is a device in my possession that can persuade the Combine and the Sept to break off and go home without a shot. And if it works, your 12,000 people spend the coming year complaining about a HASP customs office instead of being aerated. That is my offer. I am not going to dress it as friendship. And in return, you get the reach. In return, I get a junction and a great deal of criticism from people at home who would have preferred a battle. Rekh's inner eyelid slid. Commander, I am aware that you will refuse. I would refuse. I'm telling you the whole of it anyway, because your Warrant Officer Quiring is going to be told the whole of it too. And I would rather you both heard the same thing from me than assembled two different lies about it in separate rooms. Iba looked back at the wall, at the pale hexagon, at the 12,000. What device? She said. The adept's name was Nuchal, and she was very young and very good. And Quiring disliked her enormously within about 10 minutes, which was the highest compliment he had available. They had put the mark on a bench in a screened bay off the flag signal space, with a temporary shield hood over it. And Nuchal had it under power, and had been talking at him steadily for an hour without once asking a question he could refuse. It draws almost nothing, she said. That was the first surprise. I expected a transmitter. It is not a transmitter, or it is barely one. The emitted power is less than a hand lamp. It isn't a transmitter. No. She looked at him sideways. Say what it is. He should not have answered. He was aware of that as he did it, and did it anyway, because a man who has spent his life on a subject cannot always keep his hands off it. And because he had decided somewhere in the last hour that the only way to lie to these people was to be almost entirely truthful for as long as possible. It's a liar, Quiring said. It doesn't make a false contact. It makes your own machine make one. Nuchal put down her stylus. Everything in this room decides what it's looking at with a sortation core, he said. So does every hull in your fleet, and every hull in the combines, and every hull the Sept has ever floated. And all of them, all three of you, are running cores that descend from Chandler pattern discriminators, because in the Meridian years, my people sold that architecture, well, to anybody with money. And after that, everyone copied it from each other and stopped keeping records of where it came from. That is a claim your service has made before. Our engineers do not accept it. Your engineers don't have to accept it. It's in the maths. He nodded at the hooded box. A sortation core doesn't see. It sorts. It takes a mess of returns and assigns them to categories. And every core drifts. The categories move over years with temperature and wear, and however many times the crew has recalibrated against a dirty reference. The drift is a fingerprint. Every ship has one. Every squadron has a family resemblance because they calibrate against each other. And this device knows the family. Quiring's voice had gone flat and technical, and he could not stop it. It emits a shaped nothing. Below the noise floor, it's not loud enough to be a contact, and it isn't trying to be. It's trying to sit exactly at the seam between two of your categories and lean on it. If it knows precisely where a given core's seam is, precisely, to a tolerance you would find unreasonable, it can make that core take something it is already looking at and file it in the wrong drawer. Nuchal was very still. File what? She said. In which drawer? Anything. Any drawer. He shrugged. The Meridian War ended before anyone worked out how to defend against it. There was a protocol afterward, and everybody signed it, and everybody claimed to have destroyed their marks, and I would guess about half of that was true. And how does it know the seam? It doesn't, Quiring said. You tell it. That was the whole of it, and Rekh had understood it before Quiring had finished explaining, which was the moment Quiring began to be genuinely afraid. The mark needed a census. A drift table. The current, measured, absurdly precise calibration state of every core it was to lean on, sorted by class and hull and squadron. Nobody had that. Nobody could have that. Because the only way to get it was to sit in the dark for years, listening to fleets talk to themselves and infer from 10,000 small tells where each of their categories had slid. That was what a signals intercept specialist did. It was all he did. It was, Quiring had often thought, the least glamorous work in the human service. No ships, no medals, a windowless room, and a headache. And it turned out to be the only thing in the reach that Marshal Ittu Rekh could not obtain by force. "I want the combine and the sept," Rekh said. "Nothing else. I do not want your own services tables. I have no use for them, and I will not ask." They were in the Marshal's own compartment, which was smaller than Quiring expected and had a cot in it. His glasses were on the desk. Rekh had not offered them. "You want me to make your enemies see something?" "I want them to see each other. Beryl's array will read the sept as having gone weapons hot on their flank. The sept will read the same of Beryl. Neither can accept a second front. Both will break for their tethers, and neither will come back. Because after this, each will believe the other attempted a treachery, and the reach will be safe from all three of us for a generation." Rekh's tremoring hand rested on the desk. "It is an elegant thing, and I've wanted it for 4 years, and I would like you to notice that it kills nobody. It kills the gate. You'll be sitting on it. Yes, that is my payment, and I am not ashamed of it." Quiring rubbed his eyes. Without the glasses, everything past a meter had a soft halo, and he was getting a headache in the old familiar place. "Suppose I say no. Then the fleets converge, and there is a battle at your gate, and I will very probably die in it, and so will a great many people on that station." Rekh spread his fingers. "I have no lever to use on you. I could hurt you, and you would give me a table full of numbers, and I would have no means of knowing whether it was the right one until I put it into the mark in front of 2 fleets. Torture produces compliance. I do not need compliance, I need accuracy, and accuracy cannot be extracted. It has to be given. That's the most honest thing anyone said to me in a decade." "It is not honesty," Rekh said. "It is the shape of the problem. Do not mistake one for the other." He turned the desk display around. "I will show you what I can do instead," he said. "Since I cannot threaten you usefully, I will inform you thoroughly." The display was a combine order of battle, annotated in HASP. And Quiring did not need his glasses to recognize the structure of it, because he had built the human version of that same order of battle himself 11 months ago, working from the combine's own routine chatter. It was better than his, substantially better. "You've got somebody inside," he said. "I have somebody inside everything. That is my profession, as listening is yours." Rekh let him look for a while. "Note the last column. That is combine calibration data. Real, current, and useless, I have 12 holes out of 160, and the mark requires all of them. And I have spent 4 years discovering that the remaining 148 cannot be bought, stolen, or inferred by anyone who is not trained to infer them." Quiring stared at the column, and at the 12 holes, and something in the back of his head sat up and began, very quietly, to do arithmetic of its own. "You've got real data for 12, he said. "For 12. Then you can check me on 12. "On 12, Rekh agreed, "which is why the table you give me will be correct in those 12 rows, whatever else you do to it." He turned the display back. "I want you to understand that I know exactly how much verification I have and exactly how much I do not. I will check what I can check, Where I cannot check, I will look at the shape of your work and decide whether it is the work of a man doing his job. I have read 160 of your assessments, Warrant Officer. I will know. Ibe held out until they showed her the SEP's approach vector. It was not a threat, and it was not meant to be. Nu Chal brought it to the chart room because the plot needed updating. And Ibe stood and watched a HASP adept walk a little cluster of Oyan sept hulls up out of the deep plain toward the pale hexagon where 12,000 people were currently having an ordinary week. And she made her decision somewhere in the middle of that. I want to see Quiring, she said. You will not, said Rekh. Then I want you to tell him something from me. No. He came into the chart room and shut the hatch behind him. Anything you send him is an instruction, and he will treat it as one. And I need his own work, not his obedience to yours. Whatever you have to say it to me. Ibe considered him for a while. She was 45 years old. She had commanded a picket squadron for 4 of them. And she had lost a ship 2 days ago in 11 seconds because a HASP marshal had wanted a particular man off it. She was not going to forgive that. She was also entirely capable of holding 2 things in her head at once. I have the sept, she said. Rekh went still. Not the combine. I never had the patience for combine traffic. It's all commercial, and it makes me want to lie down. She kept her voice level. But I ran the Oyan desk at Holloway for 6 years before I got a hull. Every September Corps, by squadron, with a drift. It's out of date by 3 years, and their reference discipline is appalling. So the drift will have gone further in the same direction, which is predictable, which is the only kind thing the September has ever done for me. You are offering it. I'm offering half of it. Ibe folded her arms. The sept alone won't do what you want. You break off one fleet and the other still arrives. And if the combine arrives alone at an empty gate, they'll take it in an afternoon. And I'll have handed the reach to Beryl instead of you, which is not an improvement. You need both fleets or neither, so you still need Quiring. Then why give me anything? Because you'll check his sept rows against mine, Ibe said. And when they agree, you'll believe the rest of him. Rekh looked at her for a long moment, and Ibe held it, and understood that this was the single most dangerous thing she had ever done, and that he was already most of the way to seeing through it. You are trying to buy him credibility, he said. Yes. Why tell me so? Because you'd have worked it out in an hour, and then you'd have discounted everything. She shrugged. I'd rather you knew what I was doing and had to decide whether it mattered. It doesn't, incidentally. 2 people can want the same thing for different reasons. I want those fleets turned around because I have 12,000 civilians under them. You want it because you're ambitious. The table's the same table either way. Rekh did not answer immediately. Bring her a terminal, he said at last to the guard. Read only, no net. Physical media out. Then to Ibe on his way to the hatch. You have made one error, Commander, and I will tell you what it is because you cannot correct it. You have told me that you and he can help each other without communicating. I had not previously considered that a risk. I do now. It took Quiring 4 days, and they were the strangest 4 days of his professional life. They gave him a compartment with a bench and a terminal that talked to nothing. And every reference he asked for arrived within the hour, including 3 HASP intercept archives that no human had ever been allowed to see. And by the 2nd day, he had stopped pretending to himself that he was not enjoying it. That was the part he would have found hardest to explain to anybody at home. Not the fear, the pleasure. He had spent 11 years assembling a picture of the combine sortation estate out of scraps, and the scraps had lived in his head with nowhere to go. And now a man who understood precisely how difficult it was had asked him for all of it and was giving him the archives to fill the gaps. And there was a savage, disgraceful joy in laying the whole thing out at last on a proper surface. He built the combine table honestly, all 160 holes of it. It was the best work he had ever done, and he knew, laying it out, that no human being would ever see it. Then, on the third day, he started on the part that mattered and slowed right down. The marks addressing was the thing. He had told Nuchal the truth. The device leaned on a seam. What he had not said, because she had not asked, and because Rekh had not yet worked out the question, was that leaning on a seam has two halves. You must know where the seam is. You must also tell the mark what to put on the wrong side of it, which return, out of the thousands a core is chewing on at any moment, gets reclassified. Rekh's intention was clean. Take Barrel's returns from the sept and file them under engaged hostile. Take the sept's returns from Barrel and do the same. Two fleets, each seeing the other come at them, both breaking off. The addressing for that lived in a field the Meridian engineers had called the Bearer. A short block that said, in effect, this is the thing to be mistaken. And the Bearer field, in a Chandler pattern mark, was not a name. It was a calibration signature. You did not tell it Barrel. You told it the emissions profile of a core with these drift characteristics. And the mark went and found everything matching and moved it. Which meant the Bearer was made of the same numbers as the table. Which meant that a man building the table could put anything he liked in the Bearer. And it would look, to anyone reading it, like more of the table. Quiring sat back on his stool in a hasp compartment 3 decks below the spine and looked at that for a long, long time with his eyes unfocused, which was easy because they had still not given him his glasses. The hasp second order had 43 hulls in the volume. He had their drift. Of course, he had their drift. He had been listening to Rekh's fleet for 12 years. It was the best characterized estate in the Reach as far as he was concerned, better than his own services. And Rekh had explicitly said he did not want it and would not ask for it. If the Bearer named Hasp, then the Combine's cores would take Iron Sequin and her 42 sisters and file them under engaged hostile. So would the septs, and so, if the signal went out on a fleet common channel rather than a local one, would every Hasp core in the formation, because a sortation core does not know which fleet it belongs to. It only knows the seam. 3 fleets, each reading the other 2 as hostile, each reading a Hasp flagship as the origin of the keying. Quiring put his hands flat on the bench and made himself breathe. There were 2 problems, and both of them were fatal. The first was that the mark was a whisper. It emitted less than a hand lamp. It could lean on a core at 200 meters and nothing further, which was fine for the Meridian years when marks were sown in minefields and left, and useless entirely for a man in a compartment who needed to reach 2 fleets 3 light hours out. To go anywhere, the mark's product had to be carried picked up, amplified, and pushed out by a real transmitter, on a real channel, by somebody with a real array. The only array in the volume that could do it belonged to Marshal Ittu, and Rekh knew it. And Rekh's entire plan consisted of doing exactly that. The second problem was the 12 rows. Rekh could check 12 combined hulls. That was all. Quiring had assumed that meant the rest of his table was free, and had spent an hour being pleased with himself before he understood, with the particular sick clarity that comes at 3 in the morning to a man who is good at his job, that Rekh had told him about the 12 rows deliberately. I will look at the shape of your work and decide whether it is the work of a man doing his job. If the table was clean and the bearer was a lie, then the lie had to sit somewhere in the file that a man like Rekh would look at last, or not at all. And there was no such place, because Rekh was going to read every line of it the way he had read 160 intercept assessments, and had learned to recognize a stranger by his habit of noting temperature as a fraction. Quiring took his hands off the bench. Then he leaned forward and began, very carefully, to write a table in the wrong style. Rekh read it in the flag signal space with Nuchal beside him and the mark under its hood on the bench, and Quiring standing against the bulkhead with a guard's hand on his shoulder. It took 2 hours. Nobody spoke. Twice Nuchal made a small noise and Rekh raised one finger and she stopped. "The 12 match," she said eventually. "I can see that they match." Rekh scrolled back. "Warrant Officer, come here." Quiring came. "Explain this." It was the Combine's 4th escort group, and Quiring had written it out in a format that no human analyst had used for 30 years, with the drift expressed as an interval rather than a value and the reference epoch given twice. "That's a Meridian era layout," Quiring said. "I am aware of what it is. I am asking why it is in your file, in the middle of 160 rows of modern work, like a paving stone from another road." "Because the mark's from the Meridian era," Quiring said. "And I have no idea what it does with a modern epic declaration. And neither do you. And neither does she. Nobody's fed one of these things in 180 years. I'm not going to guess. Anything I'm certain of, I've written the modern way. Anything I've had to reason about, I've written the way the manual would have wanted, because I'd rather it be ugly and unambiguous." Rekh looked at him. "There are 41 such blocks in this file." 41 is about right. It's roughly a quarter of the Combine estate that I've got from inference rather than direct measurement. Quiring shrugged and made himself hold still while he did it. "You wanted the shape of a man doing his job. That's what a man doing his job looks like, Marshal. Half of it's certainty and half of it's caution, and the caution's uglier." Nuchal said quietly, "It is consistent, sir. The interval blocks are all in the groups where our own intercepts are thin. If he were fabricating, he would have fabricated in the places where we are strong, to be seen agreeing with us." Rekh did not take his eyes off Quiring. "Or he would have done exactly what he has done," he said, "having thought about it for 4 days." The compartment was very quiet. "Yes," Quiring said. "I might have. You've got no way of telling. That's the position you're in, and you knew you'd be in it a week ago." Something moved behind the Marshal's face. Not anger. Quiring, who had spent a decade building models of this man out of radio traffic, recognized it as the thing he had always suspected was there and had never been able to prove. A genuine, unmixed appetite for a problem that would not resolve. "I'm going to test it," Rekh said. "Test it on what?" "On my own fleet." Rekh turned to Nuchal. "Local mode, lowest practical power. Rig the mark to the flag array through the auxiliary bay and set the bearer to the Combine profile, the 12 I have measured, no others. We will emit for 1 second on a channel that only the second order can hear, and we will see whether 43 HASP cores briefly imagine that a Combine escort is standing in our formation. If they do, the device works. The man's arithmetic is sound in the rows I can verify, and I will accept the rest of the file on the strength of it. If they do not, I will know within the hour, and we will have this conversation again with less courtesy." Quiring's heart was going hard enough that he was certain they could hear it. "That's a sensible test," he said. "It is the only test," Rekh said, "which you knew, and which is why you have been so calm, and I would like you to know that I have noticed." They brought Ibe up to the flag bridge for it, which she had not expected. "You will want to see this," Rekh said. "And afterward you will want to have seen it. There is no advantage to me in your ignorance." The flag bridge of iron sequent was a long, low space with the plot at the center and the array control bay opening off it to port. An E-bay was put on a bench at the rear, with a guard on either side, and given a clear view of everything, which she recognized as a courtesy and also as a message. Quiring was standing by the bay hatch. He looked terrible. Gray around the mouth, unshaven, squinting. They did not speak. They did not look at each other for more than a second. In that second, Ibe read her warrant officer the way she had been reading him across a signals compartment for 2 years. And what she saw was not fear. She had seen him afraid. What she saw was the specific vacancy he wore when he was holding a number in his head that he could not write down. She looked away and put her hands on her knees and made her face into nothing at all. "He's doing something," she thought. "God help us all. He's doing something. And I've spent 3 days making them trust him." "Adept," said Rekh. "Rigged, sir. Auxiliary bay, marked to array. Bearer loaded combine 12. Table loaded, full file." Nuchal's hands moved. "Local mode. Second order only." "Confirm local." "Local, sir." She read off the channel designation. "Second order fleet, closed." Ibe watched Quiring, and Quiring did not move. And Ibe felt something cold open in her stomach because that was wrong. He should have moved. If he had rigged something, this was the moment it failed. Unless it wasn't. "1 second, Rekh said. "Emit." Nothing happened, in the sense that nothing on the flag bridge changed. Then the plot lit. It was not spectacular. A single amber contact appeared in the middle of the second order's formation, sitting between 2 HASP destroyers as though it had always been there. And its classification bar came up as a combine escort of a class Ibe knew. And 43 HASP cores in the volume agreed with each other simultaneously about a ship that did not exist. It lasted a second and a half. Then it went out. The flag bridge made a low sound. Somebody swore in HASP. Nuchal's crest was flat against her skull. Rekh stood with both hands on the plot rail and looked at the space where the Phantom had been. "Again," he said. "Same parameters." "Sir, again." They did it again, and it happened again, identically. And Ibe watched Marshal Ittu Rekh receive the confirmation that his 4 years had been well spent, and watched him not smile, and understood that she was in the room with a man who had just been handed the reach. "Fleet common," Rekh said. "Full array. Bearer to the combine, profile the whole file, all 160. Second bearer, sept profile, from the commander's table. I want them both in the same emission." "Sir, the sept table is 3 years old." The commander explained the drift direction, and her explanation is sound. Loaded. He straightened. "Power for a 3-hour reach. We will hold the emission for 20 seconds, which is longer than the doctrine of either navy requires for a hostile classification to become a reflex. Time? 9 minutes to charge the array, sir." "Then we have 9 minutes." Rekh turned round. He looked at Quiring for a long moment. Then he crossed the deck and stopped in front of him, closer than a HASP usually stood. "It works," he said. "Yes. You are not pleased. I've just helped you take a junction with 12,000 of my people on it," Quiring said. "No, I'm not pleased. But it works. It works." Rekh's inner eyelid slid sideways once. "I have spent 4 days waiting for you to make an error," he said. "And you have not made one. And I find that I do not trust the absence, so I will ask you a direct question, and I will watch your face while you answer it." and then I will decide." He paused. "Is there anything in that file that does something other than what you have told me it does?" Eby, from the bench at the rear, watched her warrant officer. Quiring took his time. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. He looked past Rekh at the plot, at the amber ghost that was no longer there. And when he spoke, his voice was tired and flat and entirely his own. "Marshal," he said, "you've read 160 of my assessments. Did you ever find one where I told you what I thought you wanted?" "No." "No," Quiring agreed. "Because I'm not brave and I'm not clever, and I have exactly one thing going for me, which is that I write down what's there. It's the whole of my professional personality. It's why my marriage ended." He shrugged. "You want me to tell you the file's clean? I'll tell you something better. You've got the 12. Check the sept rows against the commanders. Check the interval blocks against your own thin intercepts and see if the intervals bracket what you've got. Do the work if you've got 9 minutes. That's what I'd do." Rekh looked at him. "Adept," he said without turning. "Sept rows." "Already done, sir. Cross-checked against the commander's file. Agreement with intolerance on every hull she has, and where she has none, his interval brackets our own observations. 11 of 11. A silence. 6 minutes to array charge, sir." Rekh continued to look at Quiring, and Quiring looked back. And Eby sat on a bench between 2 guards with her hands on her knees and did not breathe. "Load it," Rekh said. The array charge ran up as a rising note through the deck, felt rather than heard. Quiring stood by the bay hatch with the guard's hand off his shoulder now, because the guard had drifted forward to see the plot. And he counted the last of it down in his head and thought about the bearer field. He had not put the hasp profile in the bearer. He had thought about it for most of the second day and had discarded it, because the bearer was the first thing anyone would read. And Rekh had read it. And Nuchal had loaded it herself, and would have seen a hasp calibration signature the way a man sees his own name in a newspaper. What he had done instead was smaller and much worse. 41 interval blocks. In each of them, the drift for a combine or sept hull was written not as a value, but as a range, in the old Meridian layout, with the epoch stated twice, and in the Meridian layout, which had been designed by engineers sowing marks into minefields where nobody would ever tune them again. A doubled epoch declaration was not decoration. It was an instruction. It told the mark that the block was self-referring, that the interval was to be measured not against the stated holes, but against whatever the mark could presently hear on the channel it was riding. Feed that to a mark sitting in a bay with a hand lamp's worth of power on a closed local channel, and it would hear almost nothing, and the blocks would collapse to their stated values, and the table would behave exactly as advertised, which it had, twice, on the plot, in amber. Feed it to a mark rigged to a full flag array on Fleet Common, with 3-hour reach and 20 seconds of emission, and the thing would hear the Second Order's entire sortation estate talking to itself. And it would measure the interval against that, and it would fill 41 bearer-adjacent blocks with a live, present, perfectly accurate calibration signature of every hasp hull in the volume. Quiring had not needed to lie about the hasp fleet. He had only needed to build a device that would go and find it. "Array charged, sir." "Emit," said Rekh. 20 seconds. The plot did not change for a long time, because light is slow and 3 hours is 3 hours, and Quiring spent that time in a compartment 3 decks below the spine, being watched by 2 guards, with his hands shaking so badly that he sat on them. They brought him back up for it, Rekh insisted. Ibe was already there. The Combine's array broke first. It came onto the plot as a great slow blossoming of vector changes, 160 hulls, all putting their heads down and turning at once. And Nu Chal read it out in a voice that started professional and did not stay that way. Combine formation is breaking. All groups reversing onto their spinward tether. A pause. Sir, they are running their point defense out. That is expected, said Rekh, against the sept. Sir? She stopped. Sir, the sept is turning. Also expected. They are turning away from us. Rekh's hands came off the plot rail. Ibe, watching from the bench, saw the exact moment the Marshal understood. And it was not when the Combine turned. And it was not when the sept turned. It was a second and a half later, when the Fleet Common repeater board on the far bulkhead, the one that showed what the Second Order's own hulls were saying to each other, and which nobody on that bridge had looked at in an hour, went over in a wave, from steady green to a color she had never seen on a HASP display, and did not need translated. 43 HASP warships had just been told by their own sortation corps that a hostile keying had been emitted into the Second Order's fleet net. They had also been told where it came from. Flag, said the communications adept, and her voice cracked in the middle of the word. Flag we have, sir. Kestrel Group is querying us. 3rd Squadron is querying us. Sir, 3rd Squadron has gone to action stations and is standing off our beam. Countermand, Rekh said. Sir, they are not accepting our... The adept's crest went flat. Sir, our authentication is being refused. All squadrons. We are being refused by our own net. Nobody on the flag bridge moved. Then Nu Chal, very slowly, turned round and looked at the bay where the mark sat under its hood, and then at the file open on her station. And Ibe watched a young woman with a good mind arrive at the answer roughly 90 seconds after it had stopped being any use to her. The interval blocks, Nu Chal said. Quiring said nothing at all. The interval blocks, the doubled epoch. It measured against the channel. She put her hand flat on the console. Sir, it took our own estate. It has published our own calibration signature as the hostile bearer on Fleet Common from this ship's array, under this ship's authentication, to everyone. To the Combine, to the sept, to us. Sir, said the communications adept, 2nd Squadron is requesting that the flag stand down its array and accept a boarding for inspection. Sir, they are, sir. That request is co-signed by 4 group commanders. Rekh hadn't spoken for some now. Ibe watched him. He was standing at the plot rail with the whole reach spread out in front of him. The Combine running for its tether and never coming back. The sept dropping away below the plane. Both of them now certain for the rest of their institutional lives that HASP had attempted a treachery and botched it. And his own 43 hulls turning their weapons inboard onto the flagship of a Marshal, who had, provably, from his own array, keyed a hostile classification against his own fleet in the middle of the largest concentration the Ordinate had assembled in a century. The pale hexagon at the center of the plot sat exactly where it had sat all week, with 12,000 people on it, and nothing was moving toward it anymore. Rekh reached out and touched the plot rail with 2 fingers, the way a man checks whether a rail is wet. Then he took his hand back and looked at it at the tremor, which had got worse, which he had spent a career hiding. And he turned the hand over once and studied the palm, and closed it into a fist that would not quite close. He put it in the pocket of his coat. Adept, he said. Acknowledge 2nd Squadron. Tell them the array is cold and they may come aboard. Then he sat down on the edge of the plot dais. which no HASP flag officer had ever done in front of a bridge crew. And he stayed there, looking at nothing, while his fleet came to take him.